Welcome back to another episode of Out of Bounds on the Boomer Bust channel. I'm your host, Terry, and today I am re-recording this discussion that I had about the power of being white. I realized, listening back to it, and then a couple other people pointed out that I didn't really culminate the point that I wanted to make that wrapped it all together. And that happens sometimes where you have to kind of go through things a couple times and then you kind of formulate what it is that you want to say. But then also there's times where there's a lot and then you get it out and then you listen back and realize, oh, I forgot that point. And so it just happens sometimes. But I thought that was a very important point to make and to bring it all together. So, I want to redo it, add that part into it. And just kind of redo this conversation. So the conversation is about the power of being white, specifically in America. And so I wanted to talk about, obviously we're talking about identity, but we're talking about power as well. And so when we're talking about power or politics, very similarly, we hear this idea of strength in numbers, and that the more that we have, then the more we can pull together resources and we can pull together influence and all those different things. And so when we're talking about race obviously socially constructed, but when we're talking about race, it was kind of a blanket statement towards anybody that wasn't white. And funny enough, ironically, at first it was very exclusionary. It was tough to be white, to be considered white. That was a high status. And with everybody else, it was a blanket Asian, black, Indian, whatever they, label people as back then. And so as we sit here getting ready to go into 2022, obviously we have a lot more information out there, a lot more people interested in their history and really embracing those identities and understanding that, it's not this blanket statement. And so it's not just black, it's African American, and that's very different than being African. And African, there's different countries. It's not just a blanket Africa. Being Liberian is different than being Ghanaian and everything in between. And so we see and we learn more. It's not just Asian, Chinese, Japanese, different. North Korean, South Korean, very different. Filipino. And so we go on and on. Not just Latino, the very different Latin backgrounds, and the Afro-Caribbean. We're learning so much more, and we're again really diving into those identities and understanding the history behind that and understanding the culture and the roots behind that. And so the only group that hasn't done that in America is white people. And so we're talking about again, the ironic twist that what started off as exclusionary had become very blanket. And it pretty much, while race was kind of created to erase others, it ended up kind of erasing the American white people and recreating this just, again, white. And so there's many people that I've met that's all they identify as, or they try to identify as American as if American means white. But, and so they just identify as that, and they don't know what they are. And a lot of times it's, oh, I'm a mutt. I'm a mix of a bunch of different things. I don't know. I never looked into it. And I was having this conversation, I want to say last year, with some students that I supervised. And we were reading a book about identity and anti-racism. And we were talking about identity. And all of my white students in the group were just like very embarrassed. And this is their words, just listening to them and then what they wrote afterwards. They felt very embarrassed because they didn't feel like they had any culture or any sense of culture. And we're like, I never really thought about this. Now, obviously, we're in a space where we're diving into those ideals, so we're able to dialogue about why they don't think about this. But there was I was teaching a class, and we were doing this activity, and this one student who's freshman, is 18, he was talking about how he never really thought about his gender, and he never really thought about his race. And he was like, but I don't know why that is. It's kind of weird to think that I never think about it. And obviously that's the privilege, but we kind of got to the surface of that conversation. But it's many people that walk around that never have to really question those things. So anyway, the point that I was making and that I was trying to articulate is that you lost a lot of that culture. And what happened was, in that void, you had people invest and reformulate that into this white identity that they have real tangible investment in. Not only because you kind of amalgamated and erased people's culture, but also that's the identification that is associated with power and privilege in America and always has been. And so you could go through the history, you can read the stories, the articles, the books, you could watch the documentaries. There were all types of people trying to be considered white. And again, that's the power of it. Because right now it's just like, yeah, white, I'm white. And it's just like, that's a factual thing, but it's really not. I mean, you had a lot of people, you had some people coming from Japan. You had some people coming from Hawaii and other islands in early America that were petitioning in courts to be labeled white. And at one point, you were just white or black in America. And so I don't know if people have heard the story about Italians and Irish people and how they were considered minorities and everything. And some people think of that as like maybe a concept or a social thing. No, it was a legal thing. They were legally considered black, because if you were not white, then you were just black, which means you were not entitled to the rights, and you were not entitled to any of the privileges that white people had. And so obviously, once you go through history, the identity of white has consisted and or persisted, I should say, and it's been consistent. And so that power, obviously, we know within our structures and institutions, that continues to reside in that identity. And it's interesting. So again, as I was saying before, it's not to say that we have to break things up, but I do think what happens is you get a lot of people that aren't necessarily benefiting from the white identity or from being beholden to that identity. They're not benefiting from it, but they continue to hold on to it and defend it because that's what they've been told they are. And so I've told the story before where I've had interactions with people that were not from America and were from Europe and other places. And that's when I really understood the difference, because I didn't understand either as a young person. It's just white is white. And obviously, if you're not American, then you're not going to be the exact same, but you're white. But then you meet with people and you spend time and you see that the culture is just as rich. And so I've talked before in a previous episode, I was with a teacher who I was paired with for the program I was in, and she was Polish. And so she did everything up until I think her master's in Poland. And then she came here. And so just learning just the language and learning the traditions and like the culture, and like obviously she doesn't identify as American, but she doesn't identify as white. She doesn't see this idea of white. She's like, I'm Poland, or not Poland, I'm Polish, and everything that goes with that. And then you continue to meet other people and it's the exact same. So like this idea of white is very strong in America that is not very strong other places. Now there's other groups of oppressed, and there's other lines of segregation in different countries, But in America, particularly, the line is across black and white, and it always has been, both figuratively and operationally. And so when you have people that don't understand who they come from, they don't tap in, they don't connect to these roots, to these culture, and then they have, because we're all tribal people, they have to, congregate and gravitate towards something. And you gravitate towards this identity that not only many people shed their own roots to identify with, but they did it because of what it allowed you to do in America. It wasn't just to be white just because, I don't know, that's what I think is cool. No, being white had material benefit and still does in America. To be black wasn't just to be thought of less than or to look different. No, to be black was to be oppressed. And so as we again sit now, we have a lot of people, especially along socioeconomic lines, which is where I focus more attention than I do in race, but race does, inform our society. So you got a lot of people along those lines that identify and protect something that does not really mean much or benefit them. And so obviously, if you look at people that are doing better than you or whatever, oh, well, I'm not them, or I'm not that type of rich. This poor family or these poor people anywhere, they know they're not them, but they're so beholden to this identity of white that their agenda of people more powerful, more rich, more privileged than them becomes their agenda. And a lot of people talked about, well, how did Trump get so much movement with the poor white people and all these other demographics that he never served and had no intention on serving? And that is part of the conversation, is that, again, you are beholden a lot of times to this identity, this blanket identity that does not necessarily serve you, but you recognize it as that is where the power is, but you also recognize as, I don't really have any other identification. And so I hold on to white. And so you have people who are, considered progressive or considered to be forward thinking and equity based, but still, even they have to hold on to that identification of white because they don't know anything else. And so I think there's a lot of people that feel that we should recapture black, and we have recaptured black and proud to be black and all that. But there's a lot of people that black means nothing to them. Absolutely nothing. Now, here in America, again, it's hard to escape it because we've been put across those lines. But for a lot of people, it doesn't mean anything to them because none of these race and none of it means anything. It's not ethnicity. It's not culture. It's not background. It's not where you come from. It's not anything at all. But for us to a lot of us rediscovering and identifying, that's one thing. But for the massive group in the country, none of that has happened for the most part. And again, there's not everybody. Again, I'm not making blanket statements. Obviously, nobody is, no group is the exact same. There's plenty of people, I wouldn't say plenty, actually. The people I know, there's a handful that are very in tune with their roots, and they understand like really what we come from, what they come from and what we come from as people who came to America throughout history. But that's few and far between for me. And again, the vast majority in all types of settings that I've ever heard talk about it or talk to personally, it's like, I don't know, I'm just white. And so there's real power in subscribing, as I said, the strength in numbers and everything else. There's real power in subscribing to that identity. So then there was a couple people that made comments about it. And again, I didn't really culminate my point, but even still, to some of their points of it does, like, I'm American and it doesn't matter. Again, that's not an ethnicity. That doesn't mean anything. Guess what? People are British and still African. Like, that is their ethnicity, or technically you would say whatever, Nigerian, British Nigerian. So yes, you're from America. If you're a citizen, we get that you're American, but American doesn't displace the other parts. And so that's part of the issue, is that some people think it does, and it really doesn't, because again, all you're really subscribing to is an ideal that was used to oppress and to gain power and to ravage and take over the country. And we continue to have people that subscribe to that identity, and that is part of the problem. Now, there's nowhere in here that I said you can't do XYZ or you can't feel XYZ just because you're this. No one's putting you in the box to say that. No one's saying that at all. But the fact of the matter comes down to your ethnicity, your roots really do matter. Like, you can recreate things and all of that, but to understand where you come from, to understand the history does matter. For anybody that wants to comment and say that it doesn't, you're wrong. It's false. Because, and just the what do you call it? The cliche line, which again, I don't really believe in cliches. I think they're smart words for a reason. But if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And history repeats itself. They say that for a reason. Because people that think it don't matter, people that think they're unique in their circumstance and that they're just exceptionally one in a billion, they continue to do things that has already been done, and you go through the same trap, the same trend. So yes, your history matters. Where you come from matters. Not saying that you have to recreate everything you do around your ethnicity, but understanding where you come from and where you fit in that, it absolutely does matter. And it does break apart the identity of oppression. Because again, if you don't understand the history, it's easy to just say, I'm white, whatever. So what? I'm white. Who cares if I decide to call myself that? It does have connotation. It does have meaning historically, and it continues to. And so you hold on to this idea. The idea of white has the agenda, has the priorities, it has the thought process, it has the tradition, it has everything handed down from this historical point of view that has been fought for this group, that has been gained by this group, that has been done by this group. And if you think you're not recreating parts of that, then you're just not really paying attention and interrogating what it all means and how you fit into it. So there is very much power in being white. I mean, you look at any group. If you get a group of 10 people, it's hard to get a group to decide and be able to be on the same page. And so I'm just not saying that there's a unimind or anything, but you do have collective power, and you have collective, what's the word? You have a collective, what's the word I'm looking for? Not responsibility. Incentive. You have a collective motive to uphold some of those things, even if you want to change some things. And again, there's people that fight for change in different ways, but you still have that motive to hold it up, because that's the identity that you have and that you adopted, and you don't really have anything to fall back on. And so again, like I said, nobody's the same. So there's groups of there's definitely groups of people that like Latino, Latinx, they like it. There's some that don't like it at all, want to completely change it. There's some people like, hey, I'm Puerto Rican, point blank, period. I'm Rican, that's it. And so same thing with black people. There's people like, if black went out, then I would not care. There's some people that's like, no, we should all be black and I'm proud, say it loud. And there's all types of thought processes and how people identify, but we have those options. And a lot of times, white people don't, because they don't ever engage with that ethnicity piece and that history piece. You don't even have the option to understand what you can really identify other than what America has set up to be the white identity. And that means something. It means something. At the end of the day, it means something. And so that, I think, essentially in a nutshell is one of the points. And I do think that is one of the ways, again, to continue, because it's a construct. White is a racist construct that could be broken apart. And I do think part of that is understanding who you are outside of what America shaped this identity to be. So, and I see that in the black community. And so I see it in other communities, and I think it could happen too within the white community. So that's it for me. Go down comment section, let me know what you think, share it around, get the conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe, and thank you for going out of bounds.